Hey everybody, welcome back to the Way of the Rosary podcast. My name is Shannon Wendt, your host and the founder of the Way of the Rosary and Choose Life. And I'm so glad that you guys are back with us. We are continuing to dive into the fruits of the mysteries. And today we are looking at the fruit of the joy of finding Jesus and the finding of Jesus in the temple. So, of course, we're talking about this kind of childlike faith. Who else? Who else could there be? You guys know me well enough. It would be a unanimous vote if I asked you guys, who are we going to talk about today? Saint Therese. Of course, you guys know my girl, Saint Therese. She is such a faithful friend, and I am so excited to talk with you guys a little bit more about her and just share with you some of her thoughts from her writings, her autobiography, Story of a Soul. And if you've ever read Story of a Soul, you know where I'm going with this. You know that it's just so good, so relatable. So I'll hold off for just a minute. We'll talk a little bit about this mystery, finding in the temple first, and we'll talk about a little bit about what this really means. What is the joy of finding Jesus? And in the finding of the child Jesus in the temple, I think we very often, and with good reason, like there's plenty of merit in doing so, but we often focus on the losing of Jesus and the searching, especially as parents. Maybe this is what we really relate to, and it's the part that really sticks out to us, this losing of their child. For 3 days, Mary and Joseph searched through the city. It's not just like, they're lost at the shopping mall or something. Like they had traveled days away, and they had to travel back and then search through this massive city for their son. And the temple was, the temple in and of itself was a city. I mean, there were thousands of people there, and anything could have happened. So, as a parent, we hear this story, and we maybe think of times when we've been separated from one of our kids, maybe lost for a period of time. We all have those stories, and they all turn out well. We end up finding them, and it works out. But that fear, we all go to that worst case scenario, and the longer time goes on when we can't find them, the more and more we become convinced that something terrible has happened. And I'm sure Mary and Joseph were no exception. They must have been terrified, not only that they lost their beloved son, but that they lost the son that God entrusted them with. So they might have been doubly anxious about this. We had a scare, about a year and a half ago, maybe, with my then 4-year-old. I was at a meeting with one of my kids in the evening, and everybody was kind of cleaning up and getting ready for dinner cleaning up after dinner when we left. And halfway through the meeting, I get a text. "Did you take Athanasius with you?" And I thought, no. What do you mean? And a few minutes later, I get another text. "We've looked in the whole house. We can't find him anywhere." And so, we kind of dipped out of that meeting early and hurried home as fast as we could. And, on the way there, I'm like, a level 2 or 3 worried, like not very worried, like nothing happened. There's nothing going on. He's not a wanderer. There's nothing scary or dangerous like around our house, really. And I was certain that they just hadn't looked well enough. He's probably asleep in the laundry pile or in, corner of the bathroom. I don't know what. They just didn't notice him. I thought, surely as soon as I get home, I'll be able to look and find him. and got home, hardly worried, searched the entire house, top to bottom, no Athanasius. I did another sweep, and this time like searching in all the closets, looking underneath every single bed, behind every chair, every cupboard, every little nook and cranny, everywhere. No Athanasius. And at this time, it's starting to get dark. And I know that if he's outside anywhere, we're losing precious daylight. And so at this point, he'd been missing for like over a half hour, 45 minutes or so. And so my husband and I made the tough decision to call the police. And we called them, and within a few minutes, they showed up. And of course, they come with their dog and they ask for some of his clothes to smell. And so the one officer is getting the dog ready to start searching the woods. They're going to go head to the creek. And the other officer and I start to search through the house, and I bring them to his bedroom. And by the time I got upstairs to the bedroom, it was kind of like the last place that I had taken the officer to look. I'm really panicked at this point, and I just start yelling at the top of my lungs, Athanasius. Nothing. And I am losing my peace, like totally. I went from like 2 or 3, the cops got there, and it was kind of like 5. At this point, I am like 8 or 9, holding it together. But everything inside me is a mess. My mind is going to the worst case scenario. There's a creek not too far. We'd already checked the pool. He wasn't in the pool. Like this, I had convinced myself at this point, like there is nowhere that we haven't looked, and there's no way that this is going to be okay. And we went outside to go talk to one of the other officers, I think. And as we went outside, my older son went back to his bedroom. He shares a bedroom with Athens, and had the thought to look in his dresser, of all places. And so Gabriel pulls out the dresser drawer, and who is sound asleep inside the dresser? Athanasius. He had climbed in the drawer, pulled himself closed, and fallen asleep in the dresser, which, mind you, was only about 3 feet away from where I was standing when I was screaming his name at the top of my lungs. I mean, if that doesn't say big family, I don't know what does. These kids have to learn to sleep through anything, and apparently they do. And praise the Lord, this story had a happy ending, and I will never forget the joy that I felt hugging him in that moment. Gabriel brought him downstairs, and of course Gabriel had him in his arms, but then I was the first person to grab him and hug him, and I tangibly feel that joy and that relief and that immense peace in that moment. And I don't think I will ever forget that incredible joy. Having just convinced myself a few minutes earlier that we were in for the worst day of our life. And the Lord is very much like that. We search and search, and we look in all the wrong places. And sometimes we can convince ourselves. We get to the point where we're so jaded and so cynical and burned out by the world, wounded, angry, that we convince ourselves that this is the worst, that there is nothing better to hope for, that this world is just suffering and everybody's in it for themselves, and I've got to take care of myself. Nobody else is looking at, whatever those lies are that we tell ourselves that kind of cement the cynicism and the rejection of hope. And that really is the precursor to the dissolution of joy in our life is the loss of hope. And this is what we can experience. This is the finding of Jesus. The reason why this is a joyful mystery and not a sorrowful mystery is because what we need to focus on is that hope. Not the 3 days that Mary and Joseph searched, not the worry and, the crazy places that my mind went for the hour that we were searching for Athanasius. The joy and the hope that we have in those difficult times, in the searching. And even when worse does come to worse, we still have to cling to hope that what we're looking for, what we're waiting for, is yet to come. That we just haven't found it yet. That is the fruit that we're talking about in this mystery, this joy of finding Jesus. And it isn't just a singular event. It isn't just the finding of Jesus the one time in our life when we kind of give ourselves over, we maybe turn our life around. It isn't just the one time or the first time that we find Jesus. This is a joy that we can live with on a daily basis when we find Jesus, when we hope against hope, because life is difficult and rough, and there are a million reasons to lose hope, to be cynical and angry. But there's really just one reason to continue to have hope, and that is the promises that Jesus has given us. When we cling to those promises, no matter how long or how hard we search, we can have that joy of knowing the Lord will always make good on his promises, and his promises will be fulfilled in our lives. The hope that we have is what keeps us going, and the joy is the reward. And there will be, there are going to be the big moments of joy when we find Jesus in major ways. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to learn from St. Therese about this sort of childlike joy and love, and where this really comes from, how we can have this kind of hope and joy. And then the last part, we're going to get really practical. We're going to talk about how to really grow this kind of joy in our lives, even when we are already kind of cynical and angry and jaded, when we have good reason to lose hope, when we have real frustrations and difficulties in our lives. How do we have this joy of finding Jesus? There's a quote from St. Therese that I wanted to share with you. And St. Therese talks about what joy is for her. And she says, "With me, prayer is an uplifting of the heart, a glance towards heaven, a cry of gratitude and love, uttered equally in sorrow and in joy." And for us, that's kind of the sort of mode of operation that we need to work ourselves into, is that we're giving the Lord this cry of gratitude and love equally when we're in times of sorrow and when we're in times of joy. And this kind of becomes like a sort of self-fulfilling thing when we step into these times of sorrow with gratitude and love. It becomes joy. And St. Therese talks about in Story of a Soul, she talks about how she learned to love suffering and find joy in suffering. And at first, when you read it, if you're not used to thinking that way, which, I'm not, it's difficult still, but having read Therese, I'm becoming more familiar with it, and I understand. It sounds a little kind of fatalistic, kind of masochistic, where she's looking for and longing for opportunities to suffer. And you wonder, why did she have to go looking for difficulties? Why did she like kind of throw herself into or allow herself to kind of give herself over to those sufferings? Our natural tendency is to want to push away from those things and to go the opposite direction of suffering, self-preservation. So why would Therese seek to sacrifice herself for those sufferings that could have been avoided? She didn't have to stay in a situation that was bothersome or annoying or difficult or painful when she could have left, or she could have just even chosen to do something different. And she tells lots of different stories in her autobiography, Story of a Soul, about these kind of opportunities. And you wonder, like, I would have just gone somewhere else, done something different. I would have gone the other direction. I would have found another task to do. But for Saint Therese, these opportunities to die to herself became an opportunity to become closer to her beloved, closer to Christ. And the more that she was able to kind of quiet down that natural tendency to put ourselves first and to preserve ourselves, she was able to become more and more like Christ. She was able to walk the way of the cross, to carry her cross, all of the little, big and small, the mundane and the extraordinary crosses. And it was those mundane things. It was the little daily things, the little kind of pebble in your shoe, the small sacrifices that she would make just to be near somebody that annoyed her. Those little things that she did trained her body and her soul to embrace suffering and to embrace the cross. And when she became very, very ill, instead of being angry at the Lord, being frustrated that she could no longer serve him in the ways that she was used to, she loved this new cross, and she stepped into this incredible illness with joy and with peace. And she used it as an opportunity to love. And it is through that love that we've all been able to learn lessons that we otherwise wouldn't have. She brought this teaching of the little way to the church, this teaching of love that had never been shared with the church in this way, this very profound, very, very simple, very tangible way to become a saint. And it's through these little things. It's through embracing these little crosses, and more than just embracing, but really learning to find joy and to love these crosses. In chapter 11 in the Story of Soul, Therese tells this story of when she really found Jesus, when she really found her vocation and her love. And I'll read this to you. She says, "Then beside myself with joy, I cried out, 'O Jesus, my love, at last I have found my vocation. My vocation is to love. Yes, I have found my place in the bosom of the church. And in this place, O my God, thou hast thyself given to me in the heart of the church, my mother. I will be love. Thus I shall be all things. Thus will my dream be realized.'" And her dream, I'll pause there. I'll finish reading this quote, but her dream was to be a great missionary. And she was tempted to be discouraged or disappointed that the Lord called her to the Carmel, where she was a cloistered nun, and she had dreams of being a missionary to foreign countries and serving and loving in that very dynamic and hands-on way. And the Lord called her to something very, very different. And that might be true for us as well. We might have ideas of things that we really want to do that might be very good things. It was a very beautiful desire to be a foreign missionary. We might desire good things. They're not things that are against the Lord or bad things, but they just don't work out, and the Lord puts us in a different place. And when we understand God's will and we begin to embrace it, then we can realize that this is the place the Lord has called us to, that this is exactly where we need to be. And this is where we have the opportunity not only to act lovingly, but as St. Therese says, to be love. That's what it is to be the image of Christ in the world. That's what she wanted to be as a foreign missionary, to go and be the hands and feet of Christ in these very needy areas. But what she discovered is that she could be love in a much more profound way within the four walls of Carmel. And for us too, in the four walls of our home, or wherever we might be in any situation in our family, at work, where it might feel like this isn't what I signed up for, this isn't what I wanted. But when we understand that this is our vocation and our vocation is to be love, real joy comes from that. Okay, I'll continue. St. Therese goes on to say, why do I say I am beside myself with joy? This does not convey my thought. Rather, is it peace which has become my portion, the calm peace of the sailor when he catches sight of the beacon which lights him to port. A luminous beacon of love, I know how to come even unto thee. I have found the means of borrowing thy fires. I want to pause again. There's one more part that I want to read to you, but I love this last line. I have found the means of borrowing thy fires. What is the Lord's fire? The Lord burns with love to bring each one of us into his heart. And that's what we do when we become love, when we put on love, when we carry this cross, the cross of love. We're borrowing the fire of Jesus. And so even when we feel burned out and exhausted, when we understand what it is that we do, we're not just washing the floor, we're not just doing these dishes, we're not just changing this rear end, we're not just serving this customer, whatever it isn't just any of those things. We are embodying love. We are becoming the author of love, being the image that we were created in the world, in our world. And that's what borrowing the Lord's fire can do for us. We can become this, and we can burn with not our own strength. We might feel like, we're going to be burned out. We're going to be burned out, burnt down, wasted, and become nothing but dust. But instead of using the fuel, the kindling, whatever it is inside of us to love, we're borrowing the Lord's fire, and that is what we love with. St. Therese goes on to say, I am but a weak and helpless child, yet it is my very weakness which makes me dare to offer myself to Jesus as a victim to thy love. We are so unworthy. We are not capable of loving well. We're not capable of remembering well enough to borrow the Lord's fire, to embrace the cross, and to be joyful in these difficult situations. That's beyond us. But the Lord has brought us here, to this moment, to this podcast, to this conversation, to this relationship with St. Therese, to learn this very important fact. We may never be worthy enough. We may never be holy enough. We may never be whatever, fill in the blank, none of it. We may never be enough of anything. But what we can do is be little enough. And as Saint Therese says, littler still. I long to be littler and more so. This is what we can do. We may never be holy enough, but we can definitely be little enough. And with our heart desiring the right things, to love more fully and to be kind of immersed or kind of overwhelmed, enveloped totally in love itself, and to live our life that way. Even though we don't understand it, we don't have to intellectually have a full comprehension of what that means. But because that's our childlike desire, and the one who put that desire in our hearts knows how to bring that to fulfillment. All we need to do is dare to love, dare to hope, dare to cling to that joy. And the Lord will fulfill the desires of our heart. All right, let's get really practical now. How is it? We've been talking about these kind of lofty things, these big ideas of love and joy and suffering, and how we kind of embody all of this in our lives. Let's get practical. And we might look at Saint Therese, and I have a very dear priest friend who doesn't like Saint Therese. He said he finds her too saccharine sweet. And it's because he's read some of that other stuff where she is just so poetic in her language of love, but it doesn't even seem very grounded in reality. And if you find yourself more of a realist, then these lofty words of love might not really land with you. But when we understand that Saint Therese was not just this kind of saccharine sweet, as Father Ron would say, character who just had a smile on her face 24/7, and she just loved the unlovable, and she served. And no, Saint Therese was a very real person. She struggled to love and to fulfill her vocation. She lived in a convent with a bunch of ordinary people, with a bunch of people that have bad habits and annoying things. And Saint Therese wrote extensively about them. So she tells a few good stories about them, but I'll read this one. For a long time, my place at meditation was near a sister who fidgeted continually, either with her rosary or something else, possibly. As I am very quick of hearing, I alone heard her, but I cannot tell you how much it tried me. I should have liked to turn round and by looking at the offender make her stop the noise. But in my heart I knew that I ought to bear it tranquilly, both for love of God and to avoid giving pain. So I kept quiet. But the effort cost me so much that sometimes I was bathed in perspiration. I want to just stop here for a second. Can you just imagine being that annoyed that it causes you to physically sweat? So think about this situation. You are a young Carmelite nun. You desire nothing more than to pour your heart out to the Lord. We know the words of Saint Therese. She's very poetic and flowery and beautiful. Can you imagine this beautiful poem, this beautiful prayer flowing out of her heart to the Lord, and then somebody fiddling, just the annoying clicking behind her, tinkering with something to pull her out of her ecstasy? Trying to recollect. Okay, now that you have that picture in your mind, I'll continue. And my meditation consisted merely in suffering with patience. After a time, I tried to endure it in peace and joy, at least deep down in my soul, and I strove to take actual pleasure in the disagreeable little noise. Instead of trying not to hear it, which was impossible, I set myself to listen as though it had been some delightful music, and my meditation, which was not the prayer of quiet, was passed in offering this music to our Lord. I love the way that she turned this around. She is so firmly rooted in joy that she made this occasion of incredible annoyance, so much so that it caused her to sweat. And she turned this into an opportunity to love. It's all in your mindset. She changed. Did the action, did the annoying thing change? No. The only thing that changed in this situation was how Therese thought about the annoyance. Was it an annoyance? Was it a thorn sent to humble her? Was it, something sent to pull her off track of her path to holiness? No, none of these things were what Therese chose to believe about the fidgety sister. She chose to hear that and to turn it into something lovely. Same noise, different attitude, a different choice. And for us too, that same can be true. St. Therese finished this letter writing to her sister, who was the Mother Abbess at the time. She said, "Dear Mother, you see that I am a very little soul who can only offer very little things to our Lord." We are little souls, and sometimes we try to be too big for ourselves, and we think about these little things, this idea of just changing our perspective, changing our mind on something, as so little as to be insignificant. Like it couldn't really matter. We think that I definitely have bigger things, more important things to think about or to worry about. This little thing, you could convince yourself that it isn't worth your energy, your thoughts. And so instead of taking the little effort to change your attitude, your perspective about it, you brush it off as too little to even worry about, but you do keep worrying about it, don't you? It is something that continues to annoy you, right? And what we need to recognize, the really practical part of this, is that the Lord wants all of our day. He wants everything. He wants the really big things. He wants our discernments. He wants our vocation. He wants our love. He wants the relationships. He wants all the big things in our life, but he also wants those tiny little things as well. The things that annoy us, the things that we're just a little worried about. Whatever those little things are, the Lord wants all of that. And when you are a little soul, you can't even carry these little things. So you give them to your Father. We give them to our Heavenly Mother. And, thinking of St. Therese in the chapel in Carmel, sweating through her habit, the fidgety sister behind her. Think about the role of our mother in that moment. Can you imagine, if you were a child bothered by something, your mother would come and just sit right next to you. And maybe she puts her arm around you and she says, "Hey, what's bothering you?" And maybe you tell her how bothered you are and how dare somebody do that. And what is our mother going to do? She's going to acknowledge, yeah. We can't ignore it. It's there. You're right. That's an annoying sound. But imagine if that was beautiful music instead. our mother is the one who can come into these situations and help us to change our perspective, to change our mind, to step out of ourselves and to step into love. Because that is our vocation. Our vocation is to love. All right, everybody. Thanks once again for joining us for this episode. This concludes our episode, or our series on the joyful mysteries. We're going to be jumping into the sorrowful mysteries. We're kind of skipping over the luminous mysteries because as we're recording this, we're heading into Lent. So we're going to be thinking about the sorrowful mysteries over the next few weeks. And first up, of course, is the agony in the garden and the sorrow for sin. So we're going to be talking more about that next week. So make sure you join us again. And if you're enjoying this and you want to think more about this, talk a little bit more about some of these things, I would love to invite you into our community. We have a community, same name as the podcast, Way of the Rosary, and you can head to chooselife.com. And then at the top, you'll see the Way of the Rosary, and you can find membership information in there. But we have a vibrant community online where we chat together, we pray with each other and for each other, and we have a few opportunities throughout the week to kind of discuss the podcast episodes and also to pray live together. And then once a month, we get together for a retreat or an encounter, which is just kind of a mini retreat. And lots more content, a beautiful community of like-minded women. If that sounds like something you could use more of in your life, look us up at the Way of the Rosary at chooselife.com. And I will see you guys back here next week. God bless.